I knew things were going sideways when I walked into the main boardroom of Apex Logistics Group and spotted a colorful poster titled Synergy Vibes 2024. It looked like a mood board compiled by a confused retriever. That is my daily reality. I am Mason Miller, 51 years old, and my title is Process Optimization Lead. In corporate speak, I am the janitor of executive stupidity. I flush bad managerial ideas down the drain before they clog our revenue stream. Before I explain how I accidentally dismantled a toxic corporate dynasty using a battered piece of jewelry, do me a solid. Hit subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts. It keeps my caffeine addiction running and keeps corporate legal teams nervous. 95% of you just listen and run. Don't be that person. Be the one who leaves a quick click. Now, back to the wreckage. I have been at Apex Logistics Group for 5 years. It is a legacy Dallas firm that started 40 years ago in heavy machinery and pivoted into trading automated logistics futures. I make sure automated data models do not lie. I am the guy they call when numbers stop adding up, or when a vice president tries to expense a 3-day trip to a Las Vegas casino as strategic alignment. I pop open the corporate hood and explain why the system is failing. They pay me $65,000 a year, which covers my mortgage and decent bourbon. The corporate ecosystem shifted 6 months ago when Chloe Montgomery arrived. Chloe is the 24-year-old niece of our chief executive officer, Charles Montgomery. She earned a communications degree from a private college, and her created title was Strategic Vision Coordinator. Nobody knew what that meant. In practice, she walked through the office holding an expensive iced latte, offering unsolicited suggestions about changing font colors on financial audits I had spent 3 weeks constructing. She was loud, invasive, and impossible to clean up after. I was sitting in my cubicle, positioned behind a concrete pillar, so I did not have to make eye contact with the social media team when Chloe clacked down the hall. You could always hear her coming in high heels. "Mason," she chirped. It was a summons. She leaned against my partition, smelling of expensive vanilla perfume. "Quick question. Why is the third quarter operational forecast so gray?" I rotated my chair. I am 51 and my patience is thin. "It is a spreadsheet, Chloe. It is black and white because that is how accounting functions. But it is not giving success vibes, you know?" She took a sip of her latte. "We should color-code quarterly revenue streams with a soft sunset gradient. Uncle Charles loves sunsets." "Chloe," I said, dropping my tone, "if I insert a sunset gradient into a federal compliance report, auditors will conclude we are falsifying financial records. Leave formatting alone." She rolled her eyes. "You are so analog, Mason. You need to elevate your frequency." She pushed away from my desk, knocking over reconciled vendor invoices. She walked away tapping on a smartphone wrapped in a massive case. I gathered invoices. This was the routine. I build the operational house. They spray paint graffiti on walls and call it renovation. Most professionals would file a human resources complaint. But human resources in a family-owned corporation is just a shredder box. You do not fight the CEO's niece directly. You survive her. You keep your head down, fix structural leaks, and wait for internal rust to consume them. My late father, George Miller, was an actual machinist. He taught me that physical machinery does not care about your family tree. If you do not maintain system pressure, the boiler explodes regardless of who is standing next to it. Physics is the ultimate equalizer. At Apex Logistics Group, the company was a high-pressure boiler with the safety release valve welded shut. Around 2 in the afternoon, I went to the break room to refill my coffee. The coffee at Apex is sludge, but it is hot and free. I was standing near the counter when Chloe walked in, accompanied by 2 junior assistants. She saw me and smirked. "Mason," she said loudly, "I was just telling the team about your aesthetic. It is so retro. Like a gave-up-on-my-ambitions look." Her assistants giggled. I poured black coffee without turning around. "Do you require operational assistance, Chloe? Or are you narrating my afternoon for entertainment?" "I just think it is amusing," she continued, stepping closer. "How you just exist here like an old desk." I turned around, holding my coffee mug. On my right ring finger, fluorescent lighting caught the dull reflection of vintage heavy silver. Chloe's gaze dropped to my hand. "And that ring," she laughed, pointing her manicured fingernail. "Did you retrieve that from a quarter gumball machine? It looks like scrap metal a truck driver would trade for cigarettes." The room went quiet. I looked down at the ring. It was thick, solid silver, hand-engraved with an intricate pattern of interlocking mechanical gears and ivy worn smooth by 50 years of daily wear. It was a heavy keepsake forged for a working man. I looked back at Chloe. I did not raise my voice. It possesses sentimental value, I said calmly. Sentimental? Chloe scoffed. Please, it is scrap metal. You should melt it down and purchase a personality. She turned on her heel and strutted out, her assistants following like exhaust smoke. I stood in the break room for a long moment. I took a sip of burnt coffee. It tasted like gasoline, and gasoline meant something was about to catch fire. That silver ring was not from a gumball machine. It came off a dead man's hand. My father, George Miller, was built from calluses, machine oil, and cough drops. He did not give emotional speeches, he repaired things. When my bicycle chain snapped during childhood, he handed me a socket wrench and told me to measure tension. When lung cancer claimed him 10 years ago, he left no stock portfolio. He left a workshop filled with hand tools and that ring on his bedside table. He had worn it every day. He told me once it was forged custom in a steel shop. Forged in heat, just like us, son. He used to tap it against wooden workbench tables while calculating gear ratios. Clink, 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 the sound of a mechanic solving a problem. When he passed, I slipped it off his finger while it was still warm. I had it resized for my hand, but I never polished away deep scratches. Every gouge represented a day he had busted his knuckles to pay our mortgage. Chloe calling it scrap metal did not hurt my feelings. It insulted my heritage, and my heritage is technical competence. I returned to my desk in quiet focus. It was a cold calculation of structural vulnerability. Chloe was an internal rust spot, and you do not paint over rust. You grind it out down to steel. The afternoon progressed, and office atmosphere shifted to full-blown panic. A major corporate investor was arriving at 3 in the afternoon. His name was Julian Croft, managing partner of Croft Capital. Julian Croft was known for acquiring mismanaged logistics firms, auditing operations, and restructuring them. Our chief executive, Charles Montgomery, desperately needed Croft Capital to inject capital into the firm. Because word was Charles had gambled away 20% of our second quarter liquid reserves on an unverified crypto venture. At 3 o'clock, an urgent memo-summoned department leads to the primary conference room. Although I am not an executive officer, I am the only technical lead who understands how to load operational data models without crashing servers, so my presence was mandatory. I grabbed my laptop and leather notebook and walked into the executive suite. The room featured a massive mahogany table polished to a mirror finish. Charles Montgomery sat at the head of the table, sweating through his dress shirt. Next to him sat Chloe, wearing a neon power suit and clutching pink binders containing 0 actual financial metrics. Mason, Charles barked as I entered. Did you verify the HDMI connection? Chloe claims the display interface lacked proper visual energy. High-definition cables do not possess energy, Charles, I replied. They transmit binary signals. The connection is stable. Good, Charles muttered. Sit near the wall. Do not speak unless requested. We must present a dynamic, modern image to Mr. Croft. I sat in the corner in shadows. I loaded verified operational audits, just in case executive management decided to drive presentations off a financial cliff. At 3:15 precisely, double doors opened. Temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Julian Croft entered the boardroom. He looked like a retired naval officer. Tall, sharp-featured, with silver hair trimmed in clean lines. He wore a tailored charcoal suit with effortless authority. He did not smile, nor did he offer pleasantries. He walked directly to the empty chair opposite Charles, sat down, and laid a single leather folder on the mahogany table. His eyes scanned the room with razor precision. They swept over Charles's flushed face, over decorative displays, and over Chloe's pink binders. Then his gaze locked onto me sitting in the corner. He paused. A subtle flicker of recognition crossed his face before vanishing. Mr. Croft, Charles began, his voice cracking slightly. Welcome to Apex Logistics Group. We are thrilled to skip sales pitches, Charles, Julian interrupted. His voice was deep, calm, and absolute. I have 45 minutes before an international conference call. Demonstrate why I should not allow this firm to enter insolvency and purchase your proprietary automation patents at a liquidation bankruptcy auction for pennies on the dollar. Charles turned pale. He gestured nervously to his niece. Chloe, present strategic vision. Chloe stood up, flashing a smile. Mr. Croft, she said, pressing a slide, remote. At Apex Logistics, we are not merely a corporate entity. We are a family. We focus on organic synergy, holistic alignment, and ideating future paradigms. I winced silently. Julian Croft did not blink. He stared at her without expression. And what is your official role? I am Strategic Vision Coordinator, Chloe replied proudly. I see, Julian said dryly. And what is your specific strategy for addressing the 14% drop in warehouse operational efficiency over past quarters? Chloe froze. Her smile vanished. Well, she stammered, flipping through her binder. Feel traditional efficiency metrics are outdated. We are pivoting toward an employee-centric happiness framework. Happiness does not yield quarterly dividends, Julian stated flatly. He leaned forward. I am reviewing supply chain routing. It is severely degraded. Who manages process optimization? Charles looked down. Chloe looked at her uncle. I handle process optimization, I said from the corner. Julian turned his head toward me. The entire room fell silent. Chloe shot me a glare. You? Julian asked. Mason Miller, I said, remaining seated. Senior Process Optimization Lead, and the 14% drop in efficiency is not related to employee happiness. It occurred because executive management transferred primary vendor contracts to an unverified logistics firm owned by Charles's brother-in-law, increasing transit delays by 22%. Charles choked on his water. Chloe's mouth opened in shock. Julian Croft stared at me, and a slow smile touched his lips. Step forward, Mr. Miller, he said. Let me examine your data. I stood up and walked to the mahogany table. I placed my right hand flat on polished wood to point out a column on my laptop screen. My right hand, the hand wearing the silver gear ring. Julian's eyes moved toward the screen, then dropped to my fingers. He stopped moving. He stopped breathing. The quiet in the boardroom shifted texture completely. Julian reached out his hand, hovering just inches above mine. He was no longer looking at financial charts. He was staring directly at the scratched, heavy silver ring on my finger. Where did you obtain that ring? He whispered. The cold authority in his voice had vanished, replaced by genuine shock. Chloe let out a nervous laugh. Oh, ignore that, Mr. Croft. It is just scrap metal he wears from a gumball machine. Be quiet, Julian commanded without glancing at her. The single word hit the room like a hammer blow. He looked up into my eyes. I asked you a question, Mr. Miller. Where did you get that ring? I looked him dead in the eye. I had no idea why a billionaire investor cared about my jewelry, but I was not going to hide truth. It belonged to my father, I answered. George Miller. Julian Croft leaned back in his chair. He looked as if he had been struck in the chest. He looked from me to the ring, then turned his gaze toward Charles Montgomery. George Miller, Julian repeated softly. He let out a long breath. That explains technical accuracy. He looked back at me. You have no idea what you are holding, do you? Idea about what? I asked. If you were George Miller's son, Julian said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room, and you possess that engraved seal ring, then you are not an employee at this firm. He paused for dramatic weight. You are 51% controlling majority owner of Apex Logistics Group. Silence that followed Julian Croft's statement was absolute. It was heavy silence that exists immediately after an explosion before dust settles. Charles Montgomery looked as if he were suffering a medical emergency. His face turned from red to ash gray. Chloe stared at me with her mouth agape, her eyes darting between Julian and my silver ring as her brain attempted to process words that defied her entire reality. Excuse me? Chloe squeaked, her voice trembling. Majority owner? He is the process guy. He fixes network cables. Julian Croft ignored her completely. He stood up and buttoned his charcoal suit jacket. This meeting is concluded. Everyone leave the room immediately, except Mr. Miller. Now see here, Julian. Charles sputtered, attempting to gather whatever authority he had left. You cannot order my board members out of my building. George Miller was a blue-collar machinist. He worked in our maintenance bay 40 years ago. Julian turned on Charles slowly, his eyes cold as steel. George Miller was the silent technical co-founder who single-handedly developed and patented core thermal regulation and automated routing algorithms that this entire corporate infrastructure is built upon. Under United States patent law, specifically Title 35, Section 271, and copyright protections under Title 17, Section 106. Those proprietary assets were never sold outright to your family. You built the corporate shell, Charles. George built the engine. And you know precisely what founding charters dictate. Charles collapsed back into his leather chair. He knew. Truth washed over his face, leaving him looking defeated and small. Out, Julian repeated sternly. Board members scrambled for the exit. Chloe shot me a look of pure hatred as she grabbed her pink binders, but she practically ran out the door. Heavy mahogany doors clicked shut, leaving only me and the billionaire investor in the boardroom. I crossed my arms and looked at Julian. All right, I said calmly. Let us drop drama. What is going on here? Is this an elaborate corporate trick? Julian walked over to floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Dallas. He pulled a silver case from his pocket, opened it, and offered me a cigarette. Do you mind? He asked. I smoke Marlboro Reds in my truck on my lunch break, I replied. I can handle secondhand smoke. Julian let out a dry laugh. George smoked Reds. Terrible habit. I told him for 20 years it would kill him. It did, I said flatly. 10 years ago. Julian turned around, his expression solemn. I am sorry for your loss, Mason. George Miller was a singular genius. We founded the predecessor of this firm 40 years ago in a small workshop in Ohio. Charles Montgomery provided initial capital from family inheritance. I managed legal strategy. But George was the brain. He wrote foundational automation scripts on paper napkins. He built early routing prototypes from physical scrap metal. He never told me, I said quietly. He told me he was just a head mechanic. He despised corporate suits, Julian explained, gesturing around the boardroom. He hated executive politics and paper pushers. When we incorporated, he refused a public board seat. He took a basic salary and returned to his workbench. But George was not naive. He knew Charles Montgomery was a corner cutter who would eventually ruin the firm through greed. So what did he do? I asked. He created a fail-safe, Julian revealed. A legal dead man switch written directly into the original 1984 corporate charter. George retained 51% of voting shares in a dormant trust, secured by a physical key. He pointed directly to my hand. The ring. You are telling me this silver ring is a legal key? It is an engraved seal, Mason. The 1984 charter specifies that the trust activates only when the physical bearer of George Miller's gear ring is officially recognized by a surviving founding partner. That clause was buried so deep in structural bylaws that even Charles's corporate lawyers failed to notice it over decades. It was George's way of ensuring that if the company ever lost operational integrity, his bloodline could step in and reset the circuit breaker. My head was spinning, but it made total sense. My father loved fail-safes. He loved hidden latches, mechanical bypasses, and emergency shutoff valves. And because you recognized the ring, I said, I triggered the activation clause. Precisely, Julian confirmed. As of 10 minutes ago, when I acknowledged you as George's rightful heir in front of executive witnesses, the Harwood Miller Trust unlocked. You hold 51% controlling interest in Apex Logistics Group. Charles holds 30%, public holds the rest. I sat down in one of the leather executive chairs. I owned 51% of the company. Legally, yes, Julian said. Once we execute formal paperwork with my legal team downstairs, your authority is absolute. Suddenly, boardroom doors burst open. Chloe marched back inside, smartphone in hand. This is absolute garbage, she shouted, her voice shrill. I just searched our internal database. There is no George Miller listed on the current executive board. You are lying. He is just a middle-aged technician. Julian did not even turn to face her. Mr. Miller, he asked me calmly, would you like to handle this employee, or shall I? I looked at Chloe. She was shaking with arrogance, looking down at me as if I were dirt on her shoes. For 5 years, I had quietly corrected her mistakes. I had listened to her mock my clothes, my age, and my background. And 30 minutes ago, she had called my father's ring scrap metal. Something inside me clicked into place. It was the sound of a safety valve releasing high pressure. I stood up and walked over to Chloe. Without her high heels, she was several inches shorter than me. Chloe, I said, my voice dead calm. What? She snapped. Are you going to adjust air conditioning? No, I replied. I am going to optimize our operational process. I turned to Julian. How quickly can your legal team prepare formal documentation? Julian checked his watch. My senior corporate attorneys are waiting in the main lobby. They travel with me. Excellent, I said. I looked back at Chloe. Leave this boardroom immediately. This boardroom? She laughed hysterically. This is executive space. Exactly, I said. And I am the majority owner. Get out and take your mood board with you. Chloe stared at me, her mouth open in disbelief. She looked to Julian for assistance, but Julian merely offered a calm, shark-like smile. You heard controlling shareholder, Julian said quietly. Chloe stomped her foot like a spoiled child, turned around and fled down the hallway. I looked at Julian. I need a moment of fresh air. We walked up to the rooftop of the Apex building. The roof was a wide concrete space filled with industrial air handling units, cooling towers, and exhaust vents. It was my favorite area in the building. I knew every chiller unit by serial number. I knew which fan motor rattled when wind blew from north. It was fitting that my ownership of the company was confirmed standing next to an industrial cooling system. Julian's legal team arrived shortly after. They set up operation in the glass-walled executive conference suite. They produced yellowed legal paper dated October 12, 1984, bearing my father's distinct signature. George Miller. Harwood Miller trust terms are ironclad. Lead corporate attorney stated reviewing documents. Activation condition has been met. Ring pattern matches archived 1984 engineering schematics. Mr. Mason Miller holds 51% voting control. What about Charles Montgomery? I asked. Charles is currently locked in his office, the attorney replied dryly. Legally, he is now a minority shareholder. He serves at your discretion. You have statutory authority to remove him from executive management, dissolve the current board, or initiate a full forensic audit. I ran my index finger over my father's signature. George Miller. He had played a 40-year game of structural patience. He had planted a technical seed and waited for his son to use it when the company needed maintenance. And Chloe Montgomery? Julian asked me, firing her immediately as too simple. I said thoughtfully, she considers herself a strategic visionary. Let us see how she manages actual operational reality. What is your plan? Julian asked. I looked at the lead attorney. Draft an executive directive effective immediately. The Office of Process Optimization assumes direct operational control over executive expenditures. All department spending exceeding $50 requires my written approval. Furthermore, initiate an immediate audit of all vendor contracts under federal compliance standards, specifically reviewing fiduciary duty obligations and Warren Act notification requirements regarding recent staff layoffs. The lawyer smiled. You are placing executive management on an operational improvement plan. I am treating them like mismanaged machinery, I replied. If they cannot operate efficiently, they will be recalibrated. By following morning, atmosphere throughout Apex Logistics Group transformed from executive arrogance to absolute quiet. I arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, wearing my usual work clothes, a comfortable button-down shirt and simple trousers. Typically, no one acknowledged my presence unless network servers failed. Today, as I passed front security desks, Hank, head security officer, stood at attention. Good morning, Mr. Miller, Hank said respectfully. Morning, Hank, I replied. Your primary badge reader is registering a millisecond delay. I will recalibrate the controller later today. Hank looked shocked. You do not need to perform maintenance yourself, sir. I can submit a work order. I am maintenance, Hank, I said with a slight smile, walking through turnstiles. When I reached the third floor, my cubicle behind the concrete pillar had been altered. Someone placed a vase of gas station flowers on my desk alongside a card reading, Congratulations from Employee Relations Committee. Committee consisted of Pamela from Human Resources. Pamela was a woman whose professional smile looked like it caused her physical pain. She had been Charles Montgomery's corporate enforcer for a decade. My desk phone rang. It was Pamela. Mason, she chirped nervously. Or should I say Mr. Miller? Charles and I were hoping to schedule a quick alignment meeting in executive suites regarding transition procedures. I am occupied, Pamela, I said, logging into central servers with root administrator credentials. For the first time in 5 years, every locked file folder displayed an open green padlock. I now possess total digital oversight. Of course, Pamela continued smoothly. But Charles is very eager to discuss terms. Tell Charles I am conducting a forensic audit of vendor expenses from 2018 to present, I replied flatly. If he wishes to confer, he may visit my cubicle. Silence hung on the line for several seconds. Your cubicle? Yes. Desk behind structural pillar. Advise him to bring a folding chair. I only have one. I hung up. I spent next 2 hours reviewing internal ledgers. With full administrative access, financial misconduct was not subtle. It was remarkably lazy. Charles Montgomery had been siphoning corporate capital through unverified consulting fees paid to shell companies registered in Delaware. I opened Chloe Montgomery's employee profile. Her annual salary was set at $180,000. Her documented job duties were listed as facilitating cross-functional alignment and elevating brand resonance. Previous employment history consisted of managing a personal social media account. I let out a dry laugh. I had been earning $65,000 maintaining core server infrastructure, while Chloe drew triple my salary for posting decorative graphics. At 10:30, heavy footsteps approached my desk. Charles Montgomery rounded the concrete pillar. He was missing his suit jacket, his silk tie was loosened, and his face showed severe sleep deprivation. Trailing behind him was Chloe, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors and looking stripped of her usual swagger. Mason, Charles rasped, leaning over my cubicle partition. What is the meaning of this administrative freeze? You cannot command chief executives to report to a cubicle. I did not look up from my screens. I am reviewing executive travel expenditures, Charles. Last month, Apex Logistics reimbursed $40,000 for a 3-day event in Miami listed as client development. Itemized receipts originate from an oceanfront nightclub. Charles turned a shade of purple, usually reserved for medical emergencies. That was confidential business development. It represents a breach of fiduciary duty, Charles, I stated calmly, and since I hold 51% of voting shares, you were spending capital that belongs to the trust. Chloe stepped forward, pointing a finger. You cannot speak to my uncle in that tone. He built this company. I rotated my chair to face her. Actually, Chloe, under corporate bylaws, majority shareholders possess statutory rights to freeze executive expense accounts pending formal internal audits, which I executed 15 minutes ago. Furthermore, I revoked your reserved parking privileges. Your vehicle is currently in visitor spaces. Parking meters expire after 2 hours, and City Hall's unauthorized vehicles. Chloe gasped in outrage. You petty snake, Chloe! Charles warned, catching her arm. He was sweating profusely. Unlike his niece, Charles understood legal reality. He was no longer dealing with subordinate technicians. He was facing an internal takeover backed by ironclad corporate documentation. Mason, Charles said, his voice cracking. Let us be practical. We can structure agreements, executive promotions, salary increases, corner office suites. I do not require corner offices, I answered. I prefer this location. It is adjacent to main server bays, and cooling fans provide excellent background noise. I stood up slowly. I require your immediate resignation as Chief Executive Officer. Resignation? Charles laughed nervously. You cannot be serious. I directed this brand for decades. You directed a corporate shell, I corrected, echoing Julian Croft's words, and the shell is collapsing under your mismanagement. You have 2 options, Charles. Resign voluntarily under terms I dictate based on total capital embezzled, or I submit nightclub receipts and Delaware Shell Company transfers directly to federal prosecutors and Internal Revenue Service. Charles stared at me. He looked at Chloe, then down at my laptop display. He realized he had 0 leverage. Give me until 5 o'clock to consult legal counsel, he whispered. You have until 5 o'clock, I agreed. Now please step away from my cubicle. You are blocking overhead lighting. They retreated down hallway in defeat. My hands were completely steady. It was the same feeling I experienced when tracing complex electrical faults in control panels. Quiet satisfaction of isolating exact points of failure. I picked up my phone and emailed Chloe Montgomery directly. Subject: Operational Assignment, Archive Digitization. Chloe, as Strategic Vision Coordinator, your immediate expertise is required for an operational project. Report to basement archive rooms at 1:30 in the afternoon to physically audit and scan 5,000 legacy paper contract boxes. No assistance permitted. I knew Chloe would not perform manual labor. Arrogant managers rarely do. At 1:45, I opened live security camera feeds for basement storage bays on secondary monitors. Chloe appeared on black and white displays wearing protective paper masks and holding her phone at arm's length. She kicked cardboard storage boxes, took selfies next to stacks of paper folders, and uploaded them to personal social media accounts with captions. Executive hustle never stops. Then she did precisely what I anticipated. She did not open a single document box. Instead, she walked over to industrial fire suppression control boards mounted on concrete walls. Adjacent to paper archives was our secondary server bay. Archive rooms utilized automatic water sprinkler systems, whereas server rooms utilized clean gas suppression. Chloe grabbed primary water override valves. She was attempting to force mainline leaks. She likely assumed that if legacy paper files were destroyed by water damage, she would have convenient excuses for failing to complete audits, claiming sudden plumbing failures ruined records. She twisted red iron valves with all her strength. Warning indicators flashed red on operational dashboards. Pressure anomaly, zone 4. I could have dispatched security immediately, but I wanted absolute documentation. She twisted valves back and forth, but no water emerged. She kicked iron pipes in frustration. I chuckled quietly. I had shut off main water feeds to that specific archive branch 6 months ago due to minor fitting leaks that had not been scheduled for repair. Pipes were completely dry. Chloe pulled out her phone and placed a call. I tapped into internal line audio feeds. "Uncle Charles," she hissed into her phone, "water pipes will not rupture." "What do you mean it will not rupture?" Charles's voice sounded strained over speakers. "Just force valves open." "I did. It is dry. This entire building is defective." "Listen to me," Chloe, Charles ordered frantically. "You must locate something we can use against Mason Miller. Find compliance violations. Search his email records. We need leverage before 5 o'clock. I cannot access his email. I do not know his administrator password." "Then fabricate violations," Charles snapped. "Claim he extracted confidential corporate data." Anything. I clicked audio recording software. It was the complete smoking gun. Not only was Chloe incompetent, but she and the chief executive officer were actively conspiring to commit evidence destruction and frame majority shareholders. I picked up my desk phone and dialed basement intercom lines. My voice boomed through concrete archive rooms. "Chloe," I said, my voice echoing off brick walls. "Water lines are turned off, but high-definition security cameras are fully operational. Look up and smile."